Hey there, Mr. Redder here. Welcome back to another episode of r/entitled Parent Stories. Our first story we'll be reading today. Karen demands to walk her daughter on our private property. After that, update. My sister demands to take my camper for her son to live in. And after that, I want a doctor to place my IV. Now for every thumbs up this video gets, one Karen does not get to trespass on anyone's property. I don't see any no trespassing signs. So please smash that like button. And subscribe and turn on notifications for new stories from Reddit every single day. Karen demands to walk her daughter on our private property. My 22 female cousin, who's 22 female, and her family have a beautiful property. Her mom would babysit me during the summers, so I basically grew up there. There are 3 houses with all of her dad's close family living there, which surrounds a big pond. There's a small boat dock, a tennis court, and a pavilion. It's surrounded by forest except for the entrance. It's totally private property, which means that they have big signs at the front of the entrance that says, "No trespassing." There's also another street sign halfway down the road that says, "No trespassing." Her and her family get really annoyed when random people come walking down their property and just ignore the signs. To get to the property, you have to go down a sort of long road that goes past a few buildings. When you first turn into the road, there's a Wawa. Americans who live in our part of the country, let me know if that's what it is. It's a deli shop / convenience store that has amazing food and coffee, a small strip mall, and an apartment complex. I lived in that complex for about a year, which is when this took place. Sorry about the long description, I just hope that this will give you a good enough picture of the area. Now on to the story. When I moved into that apartment complex, I asked my cousin if I could walk my dog around her property. She of course gave me permission. One day after I was done walking my dog around the pond, I was leaving through the front gates, which again had the no trespassing signs. I saw this random woman walking with her daughter down towards the entrance who I had never seen there before. I politely asked her if she knew the family who lived there, and she said no. I then pointed at the big sign and I said, "Sorry, it says no trespassing." She then gave me an annoyed face and said, "Well, you were just on their property?" And I replied, "Yes, I was, and I know the family. I'm related to them and they gave me permission to go down there." She said, "Well, my daughter wants to go down there. Are you saying that she can't explore?" I replied, "If it means that you're trespassing, then yes, I am saying that you and your daughter can't go exploring down there." She finally gave out a big annoyed huff and turned to her daughter and said, in a very rude tone, "Sorry, honey, this lady won't let us go down there." And they finally turned around and started walking back. I felt like it would be awkward if I started to walk behind them back to my apartment, so I turned around and just walked my dog around the pond one more time, and then I left after that. The next day I was with my cousin and I told her about the entitled mom and she thanked me. She said how annoyed she gets when random people showed up. I can relate because I also have a property with no trespassing signs, yet people still walk down it. Honestly, it's probably the most ignored street sign in America. Update. My sister demands to take my camper for her son to live in. My sister and her husband fell on hard times because of the lockdown. They went from renting a nice house to having to rent a room from a friend. It was supposed to be temporary, but they've been in his house for an entire year. And he didn't have more than one room to spare to rent to them. I have a family of my own and my house is full, so I didn't want them living with me. But I have a vintage camper trailer in my backyard. One of those small ones that they called a canned ham type. It's had various repairs over the years, including redoing the floor and ceiling, as well as getting a new axle. And it's in pretty decent condition for being over 50 years old. I take this camper on yearly trips with friends and on camping trips with my family, and I'm very particular about its upkeep. My sister, though, has asked to borrow the camper numerous times to put it in her friend's backyard so her teenage son could have some privacy and use it as a personal bedroom. But I know my nephew. He's destructive with everything and would turn my camper into a total mess. And I'm certain they wouldn't want to give it back whenever I need it because he'd already be living in it. I know they can't simply go out and get a camper of their own because ones in usable condition are not cheap. And right now, they're trying to save every extra dime to get back on their own feet. Recently, my sister has gotten our parents involved, and they think I should just lend them the camper, but I've still refused. They won't let up and seem to think that if they keep hounding me as a collective that I'll give in, but I haven't. My wife is on my side and has refused to let my sister and brother-in-law in when I wasn't home. They have a vehicle that can tow the camper, so I don't trust them not to take it if they can get into the backyard. My house also has cameras, and my sister and brother-in-law are aware of them now. They say I'm the jerk because I only use the camper a few times a year and they need it now. But I worry that they wouldn't want to give it back, much less return it in the same condition. I firmly believe I'm in the right, but with my parents and sister constantly breathing down my neck, I thought I'd come here for an unbiased opinion. Am I the jerk for not lending the camper to them? Info: I did suggest they get my nephew a tent, but they shot the idea down and called a tent temporary. If anything, that just felt like another red flag to me. More info: our parents do not live close anymore. They moved several states away to retire a few years ago. Update: I showed my sister and brother-in-law this post after getting the verdict. My parents have seen it as well. They are all very unhappy with me, but my parents have backed off and say they won't bother me with it again. I also spoke with my sister alone and went through the rough estimates of what possible repairs to the camper would be should my nephew damage it. My sister was not happy to see those numbers. Then I called her out on how they'd likely not want to return the camper when I need it, but they also tried to come to my house when I wasn't home to take it without permission, and I told her I'd have no problem calling the police if they ever try to do that. My sister is still trying to say that her son needs the camper, but when I went through the comments on this post with her, she became incredibly embarrassed and then she got angry. She left saying she won't bother me for the camper anymore, but still stated that she thinks I'm a jerk. I didn't reply because I knew she was waiting to gaslight me, just waved her goodbye and she left. My brother-in-law called me shortly after to yell at me, but he had no leg to stand on other than that they want it. I told him I'd contribute $100 for a tent, but they're on their own for the rest. They actually agreed to the $100, so I guess my nephew is getting a tent to live in. Update: things seemed to get better after I made my sister and brother-in-law give up on borrowing my camper. If they'd gotten their hands on it, I likely wouldn't have gotten it back anytime soon, short of getting police or a lawyer involved. Some people wondered if my sister and brother-in-law were going to actually use the $100 I gave them to get my nephew a tent to have his own place in the backyard. I admit I had my doubts, but they followed through on getting him one. Our parents sent them some money as well, and they got my nephew a good-sized tent that he can have a cot to sleep on in and a small amount of simple furniture. I personally donated the cot as I had an old Coleman one sitting in my garage unused for years. I gave him a folding camping chair too. The boy got electricity in the tent via an extension cord from the main house. However, he frequently complained about the heat during the day and only had a couple of those little pseudo air conditioners that you can just put water in to keep his tent cool. Though honestly, I doubt this situation would have been any different if he had my camper because it can get pretty hot inside of it too. Now on to what happened a bit over a month later. My sister and brother-in-law were evicted from their friend's house. Apparently, while there was trouble with my nephew needing his own space and being messy and defiant, they were also having more trouble with the friend who was also their landlord. They tried to smooth things over by putting their son in the tent so he wouldn't be in the house much to avoid trouble. I suppose that might have worked had my sister and brother-in-law not been caught with things they shouldn't have had. Illegal things. Bad ones. Their friend/landlord went into their room while they were away and he found their stash. That's why they were evicted. Suddenly, it made sense why in 2 years they couldn't have afforded a small apartment to move into despite both of them working full-time. Their extra cash just went right to their habits instead of saving it like they claimed to have been doing. Looking back, they did look a bit more unhealthy at the time, but I assumed it was due to stress. And not long after being outed, their habits put them behind bars. People who are using this kind of stuff can go very wild in an instant, and that's exactly what happened. When their friend/landlord gave them an eviction notice for having found this stuff in the house, my sister and brother-in-law both got physical with him, and he called the police. That scared them, and they locked themselves in their rented room. Meanwhile, my nephew was blissfully unaware of what was happening as he was just gaming alone in his tent. The friend/landlord pressed charges, and the police soon arrested my sister and brother-in-law because there was indoor security cameras that caught the whole altercation. I was very surprised about what had happened when I heard about it. I got a call from the police station, and I was asked to take in my nephew since he could no longer stay where he was. Since our parents are states away and living in a retirement community, they couldn't take him in, so it was up to me, and I did so. I wasn't particularly fond of my nephew, but I realized his upbringing really did not help our relationship, nor did the fact that my sister and I don't really get along. We brought his tent over to my place and set it up in my backyard. He's still living in it, even though we've cleared out the attic for him, but he says he likes the tent better because it feels like his own little house where he can just be himself. We've even added a mini fridge that I bought used in there for him, so he can have cold drinks when he wants them. Currently, we're still working on becoming my nephew's permanent legal guardians. My sister and brother-in-law are both facing heavy charges. They assaulted a man, resisted arrest, and were in possession of things they shouldn't have had. From jail, though, they've actually been very cooperative, albeit while dealing with withdrawals and no longer being able to self-medicate. I've been to see my sister, and she said she and her husband were so out of it the day that it happened, they don't even remember attacking their friend. I don't know if they're faking memory loss to try and get a lesser punishment, or if they really were that messed up. But I suppose it doesn't matter. It changes nothing since there was CCTV showing the attack. They're looking into possibly getting a plea deal when they go to court in November. But even with that, they may be in prison until their son is over 18 at least. I didn't have the heart to risk the foster system on my nephew. My wife has had my back on this too, and we've been working as a team. My sister and brother-in-law have signed over the title to their SUV to me, and the plan is to make it my nephew's vehicle when he gets older, since he'll be 18 in 3 years. Or we can sell it to get him something that uses a lot less fuel. I already had to pay to get the SUV back from the police impound. That's money I know I'm never going to get back. When my sister and brother-in-law get out of prison in a few years, they're not exactly going to have much to their name. So taking care of their son and making sure he grows up in a better environment feels like the least I can do. For those wondering about the stuff they were using, it wasn't entirely out of left field. My sister was especially troubled in her teenage years and struggled with addiction in her early 20s with the same thing. She nearly got kicked out of college for it. Our parents always dug her out of the mire and helped her back on her feet. They even paid for her rehab. We all thought she'd been clean for a long time, but she admitted to me when I visited her in jail that her husband also had the same addiction issues. That's actually how they met. Not in rehab, but in a focus group after the rehab. They didn't admit to any of this until recently, not sure why. But with the stress they faced in the past 2 years, falling back into old habits became easy for them. I've tried checking up on their former landlord to ask if he was okay. However, he wants nothing to do with my family. He had some pretty offensive things to say when I went over to gather my sister and brother-in-law's stuff, once police gave me the okay. And the man actually threatened me while I was there carrying out the boxes. He said he thinks my family are all alike, a bunch of filthy jerks. So I don't feel as sorry for him as I did. He's a pretty big jerk himself. My nephew also confirmed this. My kids weren't exactly receptive of their cousin being around. There's a bit of an age gap between them, and they just don't relate to one another. And while my nephew is messy, we make him clean his tent once a week, and we make him shower at least 2 to 3 times a week. We live in a warmer climate, but now that the seasons are changing, it's cooling down a little bit to where he says the tent isn't so bad. He's got a tablet, a laptop, a DVD player, and a Nintendo Switch to occupy his time. But we keep these things in the house whenever my nephew isn't home. It's way easier to steal out of a tent than a house after all. Considering how angry my nephew was before, he rarely shows his temper now. Yes, he makes it hard to get him to do his chores, but as a whole, he's shown more improvement in a couple months than I saw in 3 years. He's extremely grateful, but he's also very solitary. We give him space most of the time, and I make sure my kids don't bother him either. He's going through a lot right now. My nephew plays a lot of Zelda and Fortnite. At least those are 2 of the games he plays that I know of. My kids love those games too. We've also given my nephew the old 10-speed road bike I used to use years ago. He rides it to and from school as we live about a mile away from the local high school. Thus far, most of the drama from him has been school-related. He had to change to a different high school and make new friends, which he wasn't particularly happy about. He really doesn't like doing his homework, and he's been fighting with his teachers, but that's a problem many parents face on the regular. He says he's made a few friends though, and I'm thankful for that. We're taking things one step at a time, and so far it's slowly getting better. My nephew has also talked of one day getting a part-time job. For the record, he brought this up, not me or my wife. He says he needs to be ready to be independent when he's 18, but we wouldn't kick him out just for getting older. He's one of our kids now too, after all. But if he's willing to work hard and move on to working full-time or going to college, we'll encourage him. I just don't want him ending up like either of his parents. He seems to be far better off mentally without their influence now anyway. It makes me regret not wanting to take him in sooner, but I didn't know how bad things really were. To think this all started because my sister and brother-in-law wanted my camper for their son. And those of you who said they potentially wanted it to skip town if they had gotten a hold of it, you may very well have been right. They were on thin ice with their landlord and falling ever deeper into addiction. Thus far, though, my nephew has been completely indifferent to the camper, even though his tent is practically right next to it. He says as long as he has his own space, he's fine. Reminds me of when I was his age. I enjoyed hanging out and spending nights in the old shed my parents made into a playhouse for me and my sister when we were kids. But we are still required to have a room at the ready for my nephew whenever a social worker checks up on us. He has the bulk of his stuff in the attic room, but chooses to stay in the tent, which the social worker doesn't seem to mind since it was my nephew's preferred place to hang out, so long as an actual room was available to him. We also have a 7-foot-tall privacy fence all around the backyard and cameras too. That helps my nephew feel safe back there at least. So for now, I think we have things covered. I probably won't update again, as it's pretty much a guarantee my sister and brother-in-law are going to be locked up for a few years. Our parents are especially mad at them about it and have thanked me to no end for taking my nephew in. They want to fly over to visit this Christmas so we can all spend time as a big family for the first time since lockdown. And before I go, I know some are probably going to ask where brother-in-law's family is for all of this. Couldn't they help? Why didn't my sister and brother-in-law ask them for help? Well, the answer is they couldn't. I don't know a lot, but brother-in-law spent the latter half of his own childhood in the foster system. His family aren't in his life. I don't know who they are or where they are. He hated them so much that he actually took my family name when he married my sister, so they aren't involved whatsoever with my nephew.
Most of the stories we read infuriate me, but this one, my heart feels something strange right now. I don't know what it is.
Aw, is Karen getting emotional?
Silence, you fool.
I want a doctor to place my IV. This story takes place a few years back when I was doing a clinical rotation in phlebotomy for my degree in medical laboratory science. I was placed in the ED, emergency department, of a local hospital, practicing poking patients and drawing their blood. All of the staff knew that my snow white scrubs meant I was a student, but some patients took them to mean I was a physician. One night, I happened to walk by an exam room where an altercation was taking place between a patient, I will call Mr. Smith, and a very patient RN, registered nurse. Altercations were a fairly common occurrence in the ED, but I was still pretty green, so it was hard to not stop and listen in. Nurse: I've been doing this for 30 years, Mr. Smith. I can assure you. Patient:
I don't care how long you've been doing this. I want a doctor to place my IV.
Nurse: Mr. Smith, if you hold still, I promise I'll have it in a flash. You'll hardly feel a thing.
Are you deaf or just stupid? I want...
At this point, the man catches sight of me loitering in the hallway.
I want her to place my IV.
Me, flabbergasted. But I can't thread IVs. I only know how to draw blood. Nurse: Sir, she's just a student. This affront seemed to put the patient into overdrive, and he began slamming his fist on the bed rail, screaming for a doctor. The nurse quietly took me aside and asked me to go fetch one of the physicians on duty. I ran to get the kindest one, as I was afraid of getting snapped at by the other doctors working that night. I'll call him Dr. Anderson. Dr. Anderson patiently listened to my explanation, wordlessly grabbed at an IV kit out of the cupboard, and followed me to the patient's room. We could hear the patient still throwing his tantrum as we walked down the hall. As soon as Dr. Anderson stepped into the room in his white coat, the patient switched it off like a light and breathed a heavy sigh of relief.
Finally,
with a smug smile at his nurse. Dr. Anderson, with a big friendly smile. Hello, Mr. Smith. I hear you want a doctor to place your IV. Well, I haven't done this since medical school, so that's, 25 years ago now? I might be a little rusty, but I'm happy to give it a shot. Nurse, will you please position the patient's head? I'm going for the jugular. Suddenly, the patient decided he didn't want a doctor to place his IV after all, and the nurse, with 30 years of experience placing IVs, would do just fine.
I worked in a hospital for 3 years. You wouldn't believe how many entitled people you'll find there.
Am I the jerk for refusing to let my stepbrother propose with my mom's heirloom? My mother passed 3 years ago. I, 19 female, was her only biological kid, but she took care of my stepdad's kids, 25 male, 26 male, and 30 female. Since their mom passed, giving birth to 25 male, I'll call him John, so my mom was their only maternal figure. They married when I was 2, and she took care of them ever since. I'm not personally close with either of them or her husband, and when she passed, I moved to my dad's home full-time and never spoke to them again. Now, my mom left some money to each of them, but nothing like jewelry, family heirlooms, or things like that. John wants to get married to his long-term girlfriend, and a few weeks ago sent me a message on Facebook saying he wanted to talk, and I agreed. I congratulated him and everything, but he asked for my mom's engagement ring since she always promised it to him. My mom and John were really, really close, closer than me and her maybe. I knew she loved him the most, and it hurts. Yeah, but whatever. He showed me some old messages between him and my mom saying things like, "If you want the ring, just ask, my love," or "I have the ring kept in a box for you." But she never actually changed her will for the ring to be left to him, and she had plenty of time to do so because she did leave them money. This ring goes back to a few generations, maybe 200 to 250 years old. It was my mom's, my grandma, my great-grandma, etc. My mom wore it all the time, and it's the only piece of jewelry she actually liked. I said I was going to think about it before leaving. I consulted my mom's lawyer, and he said that they have no claim over the ring because it's stated for the rest to go to me while they received money, and that if they try to sue, it'll most likely be a loss on their part, so I'm legally in the clear. I texted my stepbrother again and said that I'd given it thought and ultimately decided to not give the ring, but that he was welcome to pick another piece of my mom's jewelry box. Everything exploded. John and his brothers are calling me a jerk because she promised him, and I don't know what to do. He's calling me a thief and a jealous sister. ETA. Please, people, stop calling me jealous. I never badmouthed or spoke ill of my stepbrother or the rest of my step family to be called like that. I never implied he was less than me or that I hated him or didn't like them. My mom passed when I was still a minor, and I went to live with my dad full-time. We just lost the relationship, but I've always wished them good things. I wrote a line about how my mom was closer to him and it hurt me, but nothing more. I was just accepting facts to give you context, not to be called jealous. Not the jerk. She ultimately decided to not give it to him apparently. Also, texts could be fake. OP. They weren't fake. It was the real chat between my mom and him. He had to go a few years back because he still texts her his milestones. Not the jerk. Block him. You had no contact with him after your mom passed, so it shouldn't be that hard to block him. Your mom took the time to write out a will where she made it very clear what she wanted to leave each of you. If she really wanted him to have it, she would have either included it in the will or changed the will at some point. She did neither of those things. The fact that this ring has been in her family for over 200 years and was passed down from mother to daughter suggests she was intentional in not leaving it to him in the will. She was intentionally leaving all of her personal items to you as her biological daughter. She left them money, but she chose for you to receive her personal belongings because there was a sentimental value that she wanted you as her daughter to have. You may not have felt close growing up, but your mom knew what she was doing and wanted to continue the family tradition, having the ring passed down from mother to daughter. You're the jerk. This isn't legal advice. This is Am I the Jerk? Unless you have reason to believe that your mom was referring to a different ring, it's pretty clear that she wanted him to have it. She may not be biologically related, but she raised those kids as her own, and they deserve memories too. You're the jerk. He showed you evidence that showed your mom's wishes, and you chose to ignore them and only care about illegality. Well, who do you think is the jerk? OP or her stepbrother? Please let us know. Am I the jerk for no longer supporting my family and retiring? I, 38 female, recently quit my job at a big tech company making over $200,000 a year, and my husband also makes similar working in tech. I live very frugally and saved 70 to 75% of my income with my husband. We now have a nest egg big enough to retire and enjoy our passions. He loves carpentry and is making custom furniture, and I'm dog walking and making custom cakes. Now we make enough to support ourselves since our house is paid off. With our nest egg, I think even with inflation, we should make it for the rest of our lives. So we decided to work for ourselves, but of course it means we don't make as much. My husband still works as a contractor, but the contract expires in 6 months, and I've already retired. I was burned out already for years, but forced myself through it because I was afraid of retiring during lockdown uncertainty. But it looks like a crapshoot no matter what, so I just retired to enjoy my life. The problem is, I paid for my parents' housing for nearly a decade. My brother has ADHD and lives with them and has been fired from pretty much every job he's had. I believe it's because my parents coddle him and not due to his ADHD. He got meningitis as a baby, and while he doesn't have any long-lasting issues from that, my parents were always really soft on him because of it and let him get away with everything. Now he's in his 30s and can't hold down a job, so my parents are still raising him, and my mom never worked because my dad was always the breadwinner. But my dad was laid off a decade ago and couldn't find other work in his field, so he's been doing odd jobs and part-time work. When they couldn't make rent, they asked me to help them and guilted me into it because I made more. So I pay roughly $700 a month for them to stay in their place and have done so for the last decade. In the beginning, I tried to get my mom and brother to work, but they kept saying how tired they were and kept putting off sending out resumes to a point I just gave up. About 4 months ago, I told them of my plan to retire early and start my own business, and of course, I was called selfish and ungrateful for cutting them off because I make more and I'm choosing to quit. This month, the landlord came to ask for money, and they ran to me for money again, even though I gave them 4 months' notice and made it clear that September's rent was the last month I'm paying and demanding I pay another month because they weren't ready. I told them they had 4 months to figure things out, but I was sick of paying for their rent when my parents are still in their early 60s and they can work. Now I'm getting repeated calls, texts, emails, calling me cruel and greedy for cutting them off. Not the jerk. I have ADHD and have a career in engineering. Your parents just raised a jerk. If they keep asking you for money, go low contact with them. Not your pig, not your farm. Good luck in your retirement. I'm very jealous. Not the jerk. 4 months is more than most people would get. You complain about your parents enabling your brother, but that $700 enables all of them. ADHD is tough, but millions manage to work with it. It's time for brother to figure it out. Even a part-time job would make up that $700 in a few weeks. Not the jerk. You never should have been paying their bills to begin with. You're lucky enough that you can retire so young and enjoy yourself, and that's amazing, but you're not obligated to care for 3 full-grown adults. You're not a babysitter, and none of them are senile. Am I the jerk for going on a 30th birthday trip instead of to my stepsister's wedding? Some background. My parents got divorced when I was 12 years old. My mom moved on very quickly and got married to her husband, Frank, within 1 year. Frank has a daughter, Alicia, who is 2 years younger than me. They moved in together shortly after, so I lived half with them and half with my dad from about ages 13 to 18. Towards the end of high school, despite the custody technically being 50-50, I stayed with my dad the majority of the time. I also have 2 older real siblings who were 15 and 18, so I didn't spend as much time with Alicia. Alicia and I were always cool, but never really close. Nothing against her, I just wasn't looking for a new sibling, and as you can imagine, I had my hesitations about Frank. Anyways, Alicia got engaged recently and is planning a wedding for this June, on what just so happens to be my 30th birthday. Having a mid-June birthday, this doesn't offend or shock me. It's always wedding season, so I've spent quite a few birthday weekends at weddings. It's just what it is. When my mom called me to tell me she knows the timing isn't ideal, but made a joke, "At least you'll have a free party on your birthday," I told her that actually I have a Euro trip planned with my girlfriend for that week. We've been planning it for quite some time, before Alicia got engaged. My mom and Frank both told me I need to reschedule it because a family event comes before a vacation. I responded by saying I wish her the very best, but she's not exactly my family, and I'm going to spend my 30th birthday how I want to. I will contribute some cash to her honey fund, but that's about it. They're both really mad at me, and Alicia reached out to me apologizing about the date, but it was the only time they could get the venue they wanted. I told her no sweat, and I hope she has a blast. She then begged me to come and said I mean a lot to her, as I'm the only step-sibling she had time to bond with, which caught me off guard because I never considered us close. I told her sorry, but my mind is made up. She seemed really sad and eventually hung up. Since then, my mom has been begging me to change my mind, and Frank said I'm being a huge jerk since he helped raise me. I should be there for my sister's wedding. I laughed and said I wouldn't call him a father figure and she's not my sister. That set him off even more. Am I the jerk here? Not the jerk. If you were that close, she would have known you were planning a big birthday trip. OP. Yeah, I would never consider us close, so she didn't know I had plans. But I'm not offended at her choosing that date. Like I said, having a mid-June wedding, I expect lots of more birthdays to be spent at other people's weddings. But for my 30th, I want to do my own thing since it's a milestone. I don't understand how people expect others to have sibling feelings towards their parents' significant other's kids. In some cases, they may feel family affection towards the step-parent and their kids, and in many other cases, the relationship is more of roommates. A parent's marriage to a person with kids doesn't obligate the kids to have affection for each other. Well, what do you think? Is OP a jerk for not canceling his birthday trip and going to his sister's wedding, or not? Please let us know.
Have fun on your birthday trip, and don't worry about what these bozos think.
Am I the jerk for not sharing the role of mom and Mother's Day with my kid's stepmom? I have 2 kids, ages 11 and 9. X and I were young parents and broke up the day our son was born. He married his wife, Kate, when our kids were 4 and 2. It's been a wild ride. When X first married Kate, he filed to change our custody plan to 50-50, which wasn't possible before because he worked as a truck driver and was away a lot. He wanted the kids at his house with Kate even if he wasn't going to be there. The judge rejected it, and the custody remained in place for another 2 years until he left that job so he could have more time with the kids. Then custody went to 50-50. X and Kate have always referred to her as Mom Kate. The kids call her Kate. When custody went to 50-50, X asked me to split Mother's Day with them so the kids could celebrate with both moms equally. I said no. I got Mother's Day just like he got Father's Day. It caused some tension, but I had the court order to back me up. There has been tension and drama over how the kids refer to Kate, their relationship with her versus their relationship with me, and how I have never accepted shared mom role with Kate. The truth is, I've always felt like she is secondary to me and my ex, still an active part of their lives, still has her opinions and requests, but that X and I are the ones who should be dealing with the nitty-gritty stuff. I found out 6 weeks ago that X has asked the kids twice to ask me to let them go to his house for half of Mother's Day. It came up when my son told me Dad asked them to tell me we needed to talk about Kate being their mom. He asked me what I wanted them to tell their dad. I said nothing. I would talk to Dad. They didn't need to. He then told me he was surprised they said anything since they obviously never asked to go to their Mother's Day, and how he always waited for them to say they hadn't done it either time. I told him not to drag our kids into it. He told me I was being unfair, that Kate has been around long enough to be seen as their mom too, especially as the mother to their other siblings, and how I need to start treating her as such. It got worse when 2 weeks ago, my daughter was sick, and she had the school call me instead of Kate. It was X's parenting time, and Kate should have been the first call technically, but my daughter asked the school nurse to call me. When I called X after taking my daughter home, things blew up because he was upset my daughter asked that I be called, and also upset when our daughter didn't want to go with Kate when she arrived to pick her up. They're saying I've turned the kids against Kate by not encouraging them to love and treat her with the same as me, and because I have refused to give up the role of sole mom and share the role with the other woman who is also their mother. It has become a very tense dispute because I don't see what I have done as wrong, but I guess what they're saying bothers me enough to wonder. Am I the jerk?
Support our channel by joining as a member today, and we'll give you a shout out in our next video.
Or come watch this video next. You won't believe what Karen does in that one.